First of all, thank you very much for everyone for coming today, I think on a Friday evening. I'm sure this will be quite informative for all of you, and we'll try our best to give the best information. I will get started straight away, right? Coming all of you for our Year 10 SACE and IB subject selection info session, as well as we're going to cover medicine, UCAT and engineering pathways directly into the university pathways. A little bit of an agenda for us today. We will briefly discuss about us, what we do and what services we can provide, and also then jumping into the key topics, right? Importance of the subject selection, especially for students who are in Year 10 at the moment. And then overview of SACE and IB curriculums, similarities and the differences, and what students might find which curriculum more suitable. And then we will discuss about the prerequisites for school and university, depending on stage 1 or Year 11 or Year 12, and then university level point of view, and discussing about the ATAR requirements and also some strategies around subject selection, the thinking process behind that. We will also give a brief about VET courses, why it might be important for students to do a VET course to improve the chances of getting a higher top ATAR. And also we will go through a couple of example pathways as to from medicine or engineering point of view. And then, yes, discussing some common perceptions and success tips related to the subject selection and the success towards Year 12 achievements point of view. First, I think about the entities. Today, it's a joint effort from us, Tutors SA and MedPrep, all under the same umbrella. But Tutors SA, we are focusing on providing core support for subjects from reception to Year 12 in all the core subjects. Maths, English, general sciences, and also when it comes to SACE, all the core subjects, chemistry, biology, all the maths. We have a 13 plus years of track record. We have good success rate, whether it's scholarship entry or 12 exams, SACE wise as well. Over the years, we have supported more than 15,000, I would call that as a community, right? Students and parents to achieve their academic goals. Currently, we have about more than 50 tutors, about 900 student seats in both our Campbelltown and Mitcham centres, and we are growing. The relevance for us and Tutors SA for this discussion point of view is the subject selection aspect predominantly, right? And then the mindset side. And then MedPrep is one of our other entities where we are predominantly focusing on preparing students or supporting students for UCAT preparation, right? And the relevant pathway where when it matters, the interview preparation and mock interviews and things like that. Again, we have set course or two versions. One for students who will be doing the UCAT within the 12 months, like next July, for example. And then students who are, let's say, in Year 10 or early in Year 11, depending on the time of the year. So early preparation, so that, because I know Het will go through the details later, like how important it is for us or the students to get that early exposure these days for UCAT. Then a little bit about us. So I'm Don, right? And I'm the Managing Director and the founder of Tutors SA, STEM Centre Australia and MedPrep. My background is in engineering. I did my undergrad at Uni Adelaide in computer systems engineering. And then I did my PhD in electronic engineering from Uni Adelaide as well. Following that, I was working as a research scientist at Department of Defence, DST group, for over 7 years. And then during that time, I started Tutors SA, initially with 8 students and just myself in a small group setup. And then I think word of mouth, it grew. I was doing something right in maths and physics. And then most of the parents are supported initially in the category that they're doing a lot of hard work to provide the education for their kids. I wanted to bring a model where get very good quality tutors in place and then provide small group tuition so that parents can afford it. And not necessarily like $100 tutor for 1 hour, right? So, which is not practical in some situations. So that's how Tutors SA grew. And we have come to this stage today. And then in that journey, I started STEM Centre Australia and MedPrep towards the end of 2019. We were offering UMAT back then, but then the UMAT was changed to UCAT since 2018. That's when we formed the MedPrep. And STEM Centre is to inspire the learning aspect when it comes to robotics, coding and programming side of things, which is a big need in the future generation point of view. And then Het, he's one of a 4th year medical student at Uni Adelaide and one of our senior tutors tutoring biology, SACE biology, and also UCAT. Het has been tutoring for a few years now, about almost 4 years now, right? Yeah, since first year. Quite impressive record. UCAT 99th percentile and ATAR of 99.35, right? So it's very hard to get and very good performance there. And then Het has also got the principal scholarship from the University of Adelaide to get into med. And then I was thinking twice when I typed this, right? But received 10 medical and dental interviews. You can talk about that as part of your thinking process, right? How you get there. We're going to discuss about those key points that we mentioned. key topic, right? So importance of subject selection, especially now when students are talking to the core target, right? So students who are in year 10 at the moment, beginning of term 3 most likely, or towards the end of term 2, schools will prompt you to do the subject selection, right? So normally early August is the finalization timing. So we believe it's very important to have that right thinking up front, think ahead, plan ahead, and then work backward and figure out what are those core subjects that the students going to select. For a few reasons, subject selection will impact the future academic and career paths. What I always suggest is that project to the future, right? 10, 15 years, and what you envisage doing as a career or whatever that is, right? And then plan back, and as a result, what university degree we need to do. Then think about those requirements, and then step back SACE wise or the IB wise, which we're going into details. Year 12 requirements, right? What subjects they need to do, and as a result, what we need to select now. So plan back. I think it's very important to have that thinking time, get some advice, talk to people who've been there, done that. That way you get some first-hand experience if possible, right? That's that. And then one thing I've noticed as well, sometimes really good students, they're not sure what they want to do. They select subjects they can, but then in towards maybe in stage 1 or sometimes in stage 2 as well, they change their subjects, right? Or they're not sure. Right. And that can impact on their progress because they have to realign and focus on some other subjects. Once again, connecting with my first point, if you plan ahead and if you're sure, as in much as possible, right? So the direction that you want to take, that will minimize those disturbances that might come through by changing subjects. Importance of aligning subjects with interest and career goals. There are two aspects, right? So I know as parents, we would look at, okay, where are the good jobs? That's one point we would consider to a certain extent. But at the same time, I think it's very important to consider students' genuine interest and then aligning that interest with the right pathway. That way they can excel and they can enjoy their life as a career, right? We normally introduce like a 5-part subject selection framework, right? So again, similar to what I mentioned, like a structured way, you can tick those boxes so that you know that you've looked at all the possibilities. Thinking about the future pathway, what career or what that you aspire to do, whether it's medicine or dentistry, engineering, law, arts, whatever that field that you're interested in, log that in. That's my suggestion. And then accordingly work backward and look at the prerequisites. In that, I think predominantly we're talking about year 12 prerequisites for university subjects. And then in some situations, there will be some stage 1 or year 11 requisites, right? As I mentioned before, connect with the students' strengths. And so that way, when they are working based on their strengths, even with a challenging subject, they will be able to do well, right? They have the mindset to go through that challenge and do well. I think that's a big point I would like to emphasize. And then workload balance. I know some students, you might have your extracurricular activities, your sports, maybe you're doing really well. So you want to continue with that too. Take that into account so that you can balance your extra activities as well as the co-education and then thrive. ATAR strategy. What do you mean by that? Which subjects give the best balance of, I think this is applicable for IB as well, but predominantly for SACE point of view. It's a balance of what is required for the degree versus what will help you to get a better ATAR as well, right? I think we're going to go into details a bit later about that. Meaning it doesn't mean that you have to always do the harder subjects. At the same time, we're not recommending to do all these subjects, but get that balance. It connects with the interest as well as the strengths. Going to the next few steps, here we are going to talk about a bit of a comparison between SACE curriculum and then the IB curriculum. And as probably you know, most of the schools, they offer the SACE South Australian Certificate of Education, right? What are the key differences? I think I have a table coming up as well. So SACE is for year 11 and 12 students, purely focusing on South Australia and South Australian students. And so we have two stages, right? So stage 1 and stage 2, general allocation wise, it's year 11 and year 12, but not quite, right? So there are opportunities to accelerate, and depending on that, it's not directly aligned with year 11 or year 12 in some cases, right? So focus on preparing students for the university, TAFE, and vocational education, right? So it's the key requirement. On the other hand, IB, the International Baccalaureate, so it's a international recognized curriculum or program, emphasizes critical thinking, research, and intellectual understanding. So as a result, we will see this when we do the comparison. We notice that in IB, the curriculum goes into more depth, right? A bit more deeper compared to a SACE curriculum. Again, that point will connect with the students, right? Depending on the student's skill set, IB might be a better option, or most cases the SACE might be a better option, right? So we'll do that. Compared to stage 1 and stage 2, IB is taught across 2 years, year 11 and year 12. So it's one course, so you can't keep certain subjects, and you have to do that across those year 11 and year 12. More suitable for students aiming for global education opportunities. So, I mean, there are certain students, let's say, they're looking at doing overseas education, right? This is in that situation, IB is considered in that situation as the preferred option. However, SACE is well recognized across other countries as well. Yeah, so this was the table I was talking about, a big generic comparison between SACE and IB. So best suited for. So SACE-wise, students wanting flexibility, subject acceleration, and local pathway planning. So subject acceleration, that's another point we will go into details later. What we mean by that? Through SACE, depending on the school as well, there are opportunities. If you're doing well in certain subjects, you can finish them off early, right? So for example, maths or biology, some cases chemistry, right? So you can start SACE when you're in year 10. I mean, some of you guys may be already doing it. If you're in that path, or biology, for example, you don't have to do stage 1. If the school offers you to do so, you can do a stage 2 directly. I think HET, you did that way, right? Yeah. And then IB, on the other hand, students suited to broad a global recognized program, as I mentioned before. Structure-wise, stage 1 and stage 2, whereas 2-year continuous diploma across year 11 and year 12. Workload can be strategically managed through the right subject selection, whereas with IB, broad and demanding across multiple areas. So I think each subject, as I mentioned, it go into depth. So students in a certain category will really thrive and do well in IB. University entry, so SATAC, this is the organization kind of decides or connected the ATAR and the pathway that way. And then IBAS, right? So combined rank conversion pathway. So that doesn't have much impact, I think, the outcome wise, just a comparison here in that point wise. Main question, I guess, we can ask, which subjects maximize fit, prerequisites, and performance? On the other hand, with IB side of things, is my child suited to the breadth and the workload of IB? So going deep. I know certain schools now, they're gradually changing their middle year programs so that they're trying to align students more towards IB thinking, right? So they're not trying to force, but providing that opportunity early so that when they get into IB, if they get into IB, they're not finding it like a steeper approach, right? Common perceptions, right? SACE versus IB. Few key points that we have captured here. There's a general perception that saying that IB is harder. It is true in the sense that the curriculum is more rigor, right, compared to the SACE curriculum, and emphasizes, as I mentioned before, research and independent learning. But we don't recommend IB because it's a cool thing to do mindset, right? So my friend is doing, so it makes us look smarter. Don't go there. But if you really connect with your expectations, then I would say think about it. Student preferences, once again, structured environment of SACE, stage 1, stage 2, and that's a continuity of the subjects. And then with a holistic approach in IB, you have to do about 7 subjects, including 2 languages, right? So in IB, and then they all go into quite in-depth and research and a lot of work there. And then the second point, subject acceleration opportunities under SACE. So that is a benefit that a lot of students think about, which is not available under the IB curriculum because of the structure. Conversion rates. I think a few years back, for certain degrees, there was doing IB was a favorable thing, right? But I think recent years, it has changed a little bit, whether it's medicine or dentistry. The raw conversion has changed. It is not as favorable as it used to be. So recent trends shows that IB conversions are less favorable. But that doesn't, this is not about trying to discourage doing IB, right? So I'm just trying to paint the picture. Important to consider when planning for university applications. And then the last point we have captured is the international opportunities. Considering IB is an international curriculum, it is more recognized, as in more countries or more universities point of view, more than 160. But as I said, in most of the countries, SACE is recognized as well, so that you get those credits and you can apply equivalently. The first thing we would like to mention, ATAR is not a percentage, it is a percentile, it's a rank, right? So giving an idea where you sit compared to the rest of the cohort in that particular year, right? So it ranges from 0 percentile to 99.95. And for example, if a student got 90th percentile, basically saying that student's in the top 10% of the cohort for that year, right? Or done better than 90% of the students. It comes from a university aggregate of 90 out of 90, consisting of credits, and then adjusted that way. I think we've got a slide coming up to explain that. So the aggregate uses the best 90 credits of stage 2 study. So in this description, we are looking at the SACE curriculum, right? So SACE curriculum wise, across year 11 and year 12, or stage 1 and stage 2, students have to complete 200 credits worth of subjects. And then 4.5 subjects will count towards the ATAR. So in that, 3 subjects will count towards 60 credits. And then the 30 will consist of either the AIF or some other subjects, such as maybe even the other subject that they would have done. And then they will get the best out of those remaining subjects to get that 30. And then kind of normalize that to get that 99 from 0 to 99.95, right? There are various avenues to get that credit or 30 credits or subjects equivalent to that 30 credit. Common way is that 4, and so students doing 5 subjects, so that 4 counting towards 80 and then half a full subject, right? And otherwise, we're going to discuss this. If a student has done a wet course, there are benefits towards boosting the ATAR. And some other recognized studies like some health sciences certificate 3 courses and things like that. This is the kind of the same information provided in a pictorial way, right? 60 credits coming from 3 core subjects, and then the remaining 30 credits consisting of 4th and could be the half of the 5th or the 10 credits, right? Now, students currently doing an AIF, right? So AIF will count towards this. Of course, if that 10 for that 10 credits, if AIF has got a better score, right? Otherwise, another subject or 50% of the another subject or full credit subject can count towards this 10. So parents who may have kids elder who would have done year 12s, perhaps previously it used to be the PLP for the year 10 and then the research project. Now the structure has changed since a couple of years ago, but the expectations are somewhat similar, right? So it's compulsory to do both EIF and AIF as part of the SACE credits. Yeah, so SACE prerequisites from school levels. So importance of completing prerequisites for advanced SACE subjects. For example, mathematics and science prerequisites for subjects in year 11 and 12. So here we are looking at what are those subjects relevant for SACE selection, meaning what subjects students should be doing in year 10, for example, right? I know we have most of the students perhaps halfway through year 10, but depending on those subjects, some schools will allow whether they can do methods or spec or chemistry and biology, those kind of subjects, right? And then the next level is the prerequisites from the university entry point of view. So specific subjects, prerequisites for universities. Example, we will go into details. For medicine, depending on the university, this is University of Adelaide or Adelaide University. Biology or chemistry or math methods is a prerequisite. So you don't have to do all 3, but at least 1, right? And then engineering wise, this is a generic example, right? Mathematical methods is essential. Specialist maths or physics. It used to be the case that spec and physics were required, but not anymore. There are other pathways. If a student hasn't done specialist maths or physics, in the first year they can catch up. So there are bridging courses. Once again, if a student is looking at doing chemical engineering, for example, chemistry is a compulsory prerequisite. So likewise, that's something parents have to look into in advance so that you can do the right selection, or the students can do the right selection to set that path. Now it's time for HET. What you HET?
Right. Hi everyone. I guess before I get started, I'm just curious to know how many of you, either the students or how many of you parents, want your students to do medicine or dentistry, if I could get a show of hands. Okay, cool. Interesting. Okay. So I guess, if I put myself in your shoes, one of the hard things about medicine is that it's actually quite complicated. There's a lot of things to keep in mind. And I remember being in your shoes thinking, well, I don't know exactly what tests I'm meant to take. I don't know what subjects I'm meant to take. So one of the goals I've got for today is hopefully I can give you guys some perspective on that by the end of today's sort of seminar, and provide a bit of an introduction as to what entry into medicine, and when I say medicine, I'm including both medicine and dentistry here, what entry into medicine looks like, okay? So I guess to get started initially, a bit about my experience being in medical school, and hopefully that helps the students figure out whether they want to do medicine as well, is that it's probably one of the most rewarding careers that you can pick. Now, obviously I'm biased when I say this because, being in medical school, that's sort of the perspective I've chosen. but there's really few jobs that you get that intertwines the kind of responsibilities and things that you get to do, and sort of the aspect that you get to help people through it, right? So that's one of the things that really brought me to medicine initially, but none of my parents weren't doctors, my friends didn't really want to do medicine, and those that did want to do medicine, if I think about my acquaintances or colleagues, they were quite tight-lipped about the process, which kind of makes sense because it's a very competitive process, right? So, initially for me, it was a bit of a struggle trying to get all the information, and there's a lot out there. There's not a single clear pathway into medicine. You can broadly split it up into two categories. So you have undergraduate and you have postgraduate. Undergraduate meaning you're going into medicine once you finished high school, okay? And postgraduate meaning that you're finishing or you're entering medicine once you've done one university degree. So if you've done some tertiary degree, that's a postgraduate pathway. And today we're going to be talking about the undergraduate pathway, okay? So once you've finished year 12, what's the sort of entry look like into medical school? Now, I was thinking about what takeaways I wanted you guys to get from this. And I think there's two main things, if you guys get this from this session, I think will be very useful. I think the first one is that medicine, in order to get into medicine, you have three broad requirements. Okay, so you have your ATAR, all right, so that's what we talked about now. That's your tertiary selection rank, essentially. And medicine, given that it's a very competitive field, you're looking at an ATAR score, you're trying to get it in the high 90s, around 99. Okay, so in the top 1% is what you're aiming for. Right, and this is not to scare you, but I think it's important that we set expectations about what you're sort of looking into, right? So ATAR, you're looking at top 1% or around 99 or above. Obviously, the higher you get, the more competitive you are. The other one is your UCAT. Okay, so that's a 2-hour exam that you're going to take in year 12. Okay, so that exam, you only have one opportunity to take it in year 12, all right? And that is going to give you a selection rank as well. Essentially looking at to be in the top 10% for that, okay? And then the final selection rank is your interview. Now, a lot of times I get this perspective whenever I'm tutoring UCAT, and a lot of students think that you just need to be academically gifted. As long as you know your academics, that's enough to get in. And this is one of my first takeaways that I want you guys to take from this, is that you can get an amazing ATAR and you can get an amazing UCAT score, but if your interview isn't good enough, you're not going to get into medical school, okay? So it really is sort of excellence across three key categories. Now, I'll give you guys an example of this. Is just a personal anecdote. I had a friend of mine when I was in maybe 6th grade. He was the son of one of the tutors that I went to, and very intelligent guy. You can assume he's probably studying a lot more than I am, given that his dad's tutoring everyone and he has to attend every session. So he was much smarter than me going all the way through. I attended there till about year 10, and then I went back in year 12 as well. Now, in the ATAR, he got a 99.7. Okay, so top 0.3 in the country. UCAT, top 95th percentile, so top 5%, okay? Didn't get into any medical school in Australia, all right? And that goes to show that while, you can be very academically gifted, you need to have excellence across all three domains in order to enter. And in terms of competition, I guess this is my second takeaway. There's about 17,000 people that took the UCAT last year, okay? And of those 17,000, you're looking at maybe less than the top 10% are getting offers. Okay, so you're looking at maybe 1,700, probably less than that. So the other key takeaway I want you guys to get from this is always think about a secondary option. If you're considering medicine as a primary pathway, what are you going to do as a secondary or as a backup in case that doesn't follow through? Okay, so this is something that I just like to set expectations with all my students and make sure that you're aware of this beforehand, so that as you're planning and as you're going ahead, you sort of know what you're in for, okay? But I think it's certainly a very rewarding career, something that you learn a lot while you're doing, and obviously it's very competitive, right? So it's something that you have to put a lot of time and effort into, okay? Now, I guess talking briefly about sort of each pathway, and I know Don mentioned about subject selection. So I'm not sure how much you guys know about sort of subject selection. It's probably a bit confusing for you guys at the moment, given that, you're not there yet and you have to sort of go through things, I guess, to get a full understanding. But if I could provide a bit of perspective. So as Don mentioned, for University of Adelaide, for example, you need either chemistry or biology or I think it was chemistry, biology and math methods. Yeah. So of those three subjects, you could pick one of them and you think, all right, I'm done. I've got my prerequisites. I can apply to Adelaide Uni and that's perfectly fine. Okay. And this is where the complexities of medicine sort of come into play. So A lot of people don't apply to medicine just locally. If you're going to apply to medicine, and again, I'm talking medicine and dentistry here, so I'm talking about both. You're going to apply essentially all throughout Australia, okay? So the prerequisites for Adelaide Uni may just be those three. But if you wanted to apply to a different university, let's say you wanted to apply to JCU, for example, so James Cook University, that one requires both chemistry and biology and math methods, okay? So this is where the complexity of medicine comes into play. Each university has its own entry pathway. Each one will look at your UCAT differently. There'll be some universities that don't look at the UCAT at all, some that look at a UCAT, but they will look at it differently. So the UCAT's broken up into 4 sections, okay? Typically, it's the first 3 that are mainly like the important ones. The last one, it's sometimes looked at, sometimes isn't. But within the first 3, for example, you could have a university that focuses specifically on the first section more than the other 2. Or you have universities that grade all of them equally. Or you have universities that grade the first 3 equally and don't look at the 4th. Does that sort of make sense? So it's very complicated. It's not sort of straightforward and you can just apply one rule to all. I can only give sort of generalities here, and that's what I'm going to try and do. Okay, so I'm going to try and provide some generalities on what you're sort of expecting as you're applying to medical school. Good. All right, so I guess if I can start off, starting off with Adelaide University. So as I mentioned, each university has its own sort of unique way that you're going to try and apply to it. Adelaide University is an example where I think most of you would be very interested in how to get into Adelaide University. As I said, there are 3 main sort of criteria. You're looking at your ATAR, your interview, and your UCAT. Now, of all of these, most people would think, oh, well, you know, the UCAT, it's only worth 20% of your grade, so it's not as important as the other 2, okay? Now, here's the first thing I want you guys to take away from this. Your UCAT score will determine if you get an interview, okay? So that 20% is actually 60%. If you don't get that 20, that 60 is not going to matter, okay? So UCAT score is probably one of the most important sort of initial things that you need to do. As I said, you need to do well in all 3, okay, to have a good competitive chance. But really, that UCAT score is probably the main thing that's a barrier to most people having entry, okay? Okay, so now the reason for that obviously is that we've got 17,000 people applying. They need to find some way to sort of whittle down that number into something more manageable, all right? So once you get your UCAT score, you'll be taking that test sometime in July or August. As I mentioned, it's a 2-hour test. You're going to be booking that test. A lot of different centres are available, so you can do it in the city. There are a lot of different centres from Pearson VUE, which is the people that give that test. And once you take that test, you'll be given your sort of score. Okay, now that score is going to be out of 2,700. Okay, and that score is essentially going to determine what your ranking is. Right. Now, to be competitive, as I mentioned, you're trying to aim for the top 10%. Ideally, if you want to apply interstate, you probably won't have much luck unless you're in the top 5%. Okay, because most universities prioritize local applicants first. So if you're not more competitive, it's going to be a lot harder to sort of get into interstate universities. Once you've done your UCAT, you have sort of 2 broad categories of universities that sort of give interviews. The first category gives it just based off your UCAT alone. So they'll just look at your UCAT score. Adelaide Uni is an example. So they'll just look at your UCAT score. They don't look at your ATAR just yet. And then you get your interview offered to you. Okay. Adelaide University, because I'm assuming everyone here is a local applicant, right? So most of you guys here are going to have a sort of lower threshold for an interview than an interstate applicant, because they try and prioritize South Australian applicants first. All right. Once you get your interview, it's going to be sometime in November to December. Interviews, as I said, very challenging times. Some interviews, and there's 2 types of interviews. You have MMI, which is called multi-mini interview, or you can have what's called a panel interview. A multi-mini interview can last up to 1 hour and 40 minutes. Okay, so it's not a walk in the park. You have about maybe 6 to 8 different stations, and each station is going to have a different interviewer who is going to measure some kind of characteristic. Okay, it might be your motivation to get into medical school. It might be your skills in people management, communication, etc., etc. The other example that I talked about was a panel interview. This is the type of interview where essentially it's more like a job interview. You'll sit in front of 2 or 3 interviewers, and you might talk to them for about 20 to 30 minutes. They'll ask you basic questions about sort of motivation. They'll ask you stuff about, why do you want to go to medicine? Why do you want to go to this university in particular, etc. Okay. Interview preparation is very similar to a job application, I will say. It's not enough to do an interview and say, oh, look, I want to get into medical school because I like helping people. That's what very common interview answer I get from my students. And I try and during my sort of tutoring process, and try and go through all three, even though I do focus more on the UCAT. I try and teach both about medical interviews and ATAR, and the most common thing I hear is I want to go into medicine because I want to help people. And my common response to that is, which job out there doesn't help people, right? And that usually stumps a lot of students. So it's something worth thinking about with your interviews, but that's, again, something much later on to know. But I think it's good to introduce it now so you guys have a good perspective on it, okay? And then finally, your ATAR. As I spoke about, you need prerequisites of one of biology, chemistry, or math methods. Now, the way scaling works, I'm not sure if it's very well understood. It's not too much information provided about it. But essentially, scaling is where the student's going to pick some subjects, and the SACE board will essentially say, how hard is this subject compared to other subjects? Okay? Now, if the subject's easier compared to others, so let's say if you picked something like music and chemistry, okay? Typically, people will say chemistry is a harder subject academically to do in, okay? So if you got an A+, A+, A+ in chemistry, and the same all A pluses in all your tests and exams and everything in your music, you're typically going to get a higher score in chemistry. So your ATAR will be higher than it would be if you took music and got all A pluses. So what I'm trying to say is, even if your results are the same for two different subjects, the difficulty of those subjects determines your ATAR score. Does that make sense? Yeah? And the issue with that is a lot of students have diverse interests, okay? I had a student who really, really liked music. She's a musician. And she said she wanted to do music in year 12. Now, I sort of said, look, you want to get into medical school? This is not it's not a very forgiving field to get into. And the reason it's not very forgiving is because you can pick music and you can excel in it really, really well, but still you need your ATAR in a top 1% sort of field, right? So this is one of those ones where picking more difficult subjects might be a better idea if you're trying to get a higher ATAR. Does that make sense? So you don't really get to choose what you like to do or what seems easy or fun. You sort of have to choose the nitty-gritty, difficult subjects and just sort of work through it. Okay?
Do the subjects hardness as what you define change every year, or is it throughout the same?
So scaling changes every year. So they look at every year's batch of students and they say, how well did this batch compare to another batch? So the scaling of the subjects itself might vary by 0.1 or 0.2. But the subjects itself, I mean, if you pick biology this year and biology next year, it's going to be the same in terms of the difficulty. You'll have of course, the curriculum can change, but in terms of how the SACE board will view it, it typically won't scale biology poorly versus music, if that makes sense. Yeah. So again, it's a very dependent year by year thing. Your ATAR will change yearly because it depends on your rank compared to everyone else that graduated that year. Same with the UCAT. It depends on whoever took the UCAT that year. Okay. So now, speaking of Adelaide University, as I mentioned, you look at your UCAT score, your medical interview, and your ATAR. Medical interviews, once, let's say you've done your UCAT, you've got a high enough score that you're going to do a medical interview. That's going to be about 600 students in total that they interview. Of those 600, 50% have to be from South Australia, so 300, and then the 300 typically are going to be interstate applicants. And then of those, we offer around, I think, 136 domestic spots. Okay, so 136 spots, right? Now, that might seem like a lot, and I know, sometimes it feels like, medicine's so competitive. I mean, that's a lot of spots, right? 136, it's not like it's just 100 or 90. This is where things get, again, a bit more complicated. So medicine, there's many ways that you can get in. So let's say if you've lived in a rural area for a long time, we have what's called a rural entry to medicine. That's a different pathway to medicine. If you're an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, they have their own unique entry system. So each one has its own unique system that you can enter in through. With the 136 spots I was talking about 40 of them are reserved for rural candidates. Okay? Which means if you're not rural, you're not part of that 40. So your number of spots has basically dropped down to about 90. Okay? Furthermore, there's about 10 spots for people that are already at the Adelaide University that want to transfer in. So it's called a higher education pathway. So that drops it down to about 80. Okay, so you're really looking at about 80 spots. There's also about 40 international students that also join. So again, complicated things, but that's just a general overview of how you're sort of approaching it. So you do your UCAT, you get your interview, you do your ATAR, you apply for the interview. Hopefully, if everything goes well, you got your acceptance into medical school. So speaking of Flinders, we've got one for Flinders here. And I guess here's where I was talking about there's always differences between which university you're applying to. Flinders doesn't use an interview at all. Okay, so Flinders is a bit different than that. So Flinders is broken up with 90% being your ATAR and then 10% of your offer being your UCAT. Okay. Now, what's unique about this? If you're basing 90% of your entry into ATAR, that means your ATAR needs to be at least a 99.9 or above. Okay. meaning you have to be in the top either 0.1 or 0.05% of students. Definitely difficult to do. It's not a walk in the park, but that's sort of what's required for Flinders, and they have a very few number of spots. I think only about 36 in total compared to Adelaide, which is more like 136, right? So 90% that, 10% UCAT. As I mentioned, things are tricky. If you remember, I mentioned before that the UCAT has 4 sections and they only look at the first 3 in most universities. Flinders is the one exception where they look at all 4. Okay, so my point being that in any interview or in any sort of approach where you're thinking about going into medical and dental, you have to consider which university you're going to. You have to consider what ATAR you're going to need. You're going to have to consider what UCAT you're looking at, and maybe you have to focus more on some sections than others. Okay. Again, no interview being, you know, it's really nice if you're an academic genius, maybe you just get straight in and you don't have to worry too much about sort of interviews and stuff like that. Okay. Now, Flinders doesn't have any prerequisite subjects, so you don't have to necessarily take any particular subject if you want to get into Flinders University. And again, typically medicine, most universities is about 6-year course. Okay, so that's something to just be aware of, broken up into 2 degrees. So with Adelaide University, I just finished my first degree, which is Bachelor of Medical Studies, and then now I'm doing my Doctor of Medicine, which is another 3-year degree. Okay. So this is just a bit of an overview of the medicine and dentistry pathway. As mentioned, in year 10, now I wouldn't worry, how many students here are year 10 students? If I could just have a raise of hands. Yeah. Any year 11? Year 12? No? Okay. So just a bit of an idea, in year 10, you're not worrying too much about prepping for medical school just yet. What you need to do is figure out if you want to do medicine. I think that's one of the key things. You need to figure out what subjects are you going to pick going forward and what subjects do you want to focus on. Year 11 and 12 is really where you're going to start preparing more sort of rigorously for medicine. Okay. Now, when Don talks about picking subjects strategically, I think it really applies in medicine in particular. You really only have a very few selection of subjects you can pick if you want to do medicine or dentistry, okay? The reason I say that is, as I mentioned before, if you pick some subjects which are considered to be overall easier, you're going to disadvantage yourself while trying to get into medical school. So you only really have about chemistry, biology, physics. Those are basically your 3 sciences. Typically, everyone's going to do at least one of them. A lot of people do at least 2 or 3 of them. And then you've got your maths, and you also have to do your English. And that's one of the main things for medicine. Does anyone know why you would do English?
I think it's interstate.
That's right, yeah. So if you want to apply to any interstate medical school, you have to take English. Okay. So if you don't apply, then obviously you're stuck with just applying locally. And that's a dangerous road to go down because you're really just stuck with it. Yeah, general English. You can also do English Lit, but I would say general English is probably better because you don't have an exam at the end of the year. So, you know, why would you want to do an extra exam? Yeah. Now, again, year 11, 12, you're building a strong academic foundation. I think we're going to talk a bit later, Don, about tips and things that they should look at. So maybe I'll leave that for a bit later. But there are certain few things that you want to set in motion beforehand. Again, your UCAT test. By the way, just a quick word there. If any of you live in the UK or ever lived in the UK, you can use your UCAT score here and apply to UK universities as well. UK universities can't apply here, but we can apply there. Okay, so that's something worth thinking about. And then your ATAR and your selection rank. Okay, you want to get a competitive one. You do your interview. You have your university application and offers. And then finally, you start your degree. Now, again, entry requirements vary by university. It's highly competitive, okay? Physics and specialist maths often keep more doors open. So let's say if you wanted to do engineering, I'm sure Don will talk a bit more about this, but in case you don't get into medicine, if you've done other subjects that allow you into different sort of careers, then that's something that's a bit of a bonus, right? Whereas if you did biology and chemistry, that kind of restricts you more to doing more of a biological sort of career. And again, backup pathway is very, very important. Now, some possible examples, you can look at health science, biomedical science, oral health, other science-related pathways. I just want to point out, it's not compulsory that you do a science-based pathway. The way I sort of tell my students, and something I'd like you guys to keep in mind, is if you don't get into medicine, and let's say you want to keep trying, which is completely fine, pick another career that you would be happy to do if you didn't get into medicine, okay? Far too many times I've seen students who've picked subjects like health and medical sciences, and there are far too few researcher positions in Adelaide or even in Australia. And so you're left with, if you don't get into medicine, which a vast majority of them don't, you're left with doing a career and picking a degree which really has no financial incentive or any relevance, okay? So I really recommend that you guys think about what would be your alternative pathway and then pursue that rather than trying to pursue something in science if that's not what you want to do later on. Does that make sense? Yeah? Yeah. Okay, I think that's all from me.
That's it. Yeah. So continuing with that, if you look at as another pathway point of view, the engineering wise. So again, we're combining both Uni Adelaide and Flinders University situation. So prerequisites again exist for engineering. Now again, depending on the field that you're interested in, whether it's electronic engineering or chemical engineering or mechanical engineering, those prerequisites will be different, right? So that's something you need to go into details. But generally, math methods is one of the essential subjects for entry into both of the universities. As I mentioned before, situation has changed now. Even if students haven't done specialist maths or physics, there are pathways that they can do those bridging courses when they're in first year and continue with the course. But yeah, strongly recommend that assumed knowledge is specialist maths and physics, and our suggestion is always for you to continue to do well at uni as well, select them. And I'm not generally pushing for specialist maths if your maths is not strong, but I think it's highly advantageous doing physics if you're really looking to do engineering, but whichever the engineering field is that is. And then both universities offer flexible or foundation entry pathways for students who haven't completed, as I mentioned before. And again, the caveat, I think, is confirm current requirements on each university because it's subjective to the degree as well. I haven't captured here, but for chemical engineering, for example, chemistry is compulsory or is a prerequisite likewise. Right. So a similar flow chart, let's say, I think instead of going through this, because it's similarities to what Head was discussing, subject selection, I'll jump into a few aspects. So subject selection wise, from a year 10 student point of view, look at if your maths is strong, consider doing both spec and methods. If you continue to do, if you're looking at doing SACE, you have the option still continue with spec in stage 1, and then if you think, okay, this is too challenging or I can do well in a different subject, you can drop that subject at the end of stage 1, right? So it's not like you're locked in compared to the IB situation. And yeah, so whether physics or chemistry, depending on your interest, which engineering field you're interested in, I think it's important to look that in from subject selection point of view. I want to connect with another point that Head mentioned, keeping your options open, right? So let's say whether your number one goal is to do medicine or dentistry, or let's say your number one goal is to do engineering, but always have a backup plan and take that into account when you do your subject selection so that your fallback option is not an option that you didn't desire, right? So connecting with the same point, like I had students, okay, I really want to do medicine. If not, I'll do engineering. Right? So if that's the case, then your selection will be different compared to, okay, I want to do medicine. If not, I'll do health sciences. Right? So that subject range can be different, and that will matter so that you're not blocking your options. Right? So I highly recommend that, and to think about it now. Now, before moving on, I got a question for Head behalf of the parents. This is a common question that I get. I have my view on that. Selecting all the difficult subjects versus selecting subjects that are not necessarily relevant for the degree. Like, for example, not undermining subjects, right? But as an example, right? Let's say maybe doing accounting or doing nutrition, which you can score well. So you're balancing harder subjects versus easier subjects so that you can balance your effort and also the time. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
I think that depends on what degree you're doing. I think if you're doing medicine, then you're sort of stuck with the short end of the stick. You just have to do the hard subjects, and I don't think there's much room for leeway. It's a very punishing sort of entry pathway where if you just pick an easy subject, I've had many students and even some of my friends when I was graduating who said, oh, maths is too hard for me, I'm just going to pick an easier version. It's blown up their ATAR, so their ATAR just isn't good enough to get in. Whereas I think if you're picking something that has lower ATAR entries, where, I'm not sure exactly what engineering would be, but let's say if it's 90 or 95, that's a lot more leeway because you can do a couple subjects that are deemed to be sort of easier workload, and you can succeed in them and do really well in them and still meet your necessary requirements, still meet your ATAR requirements. But if you're trying to get a top 1% ATAR score, or if you're trying to get even higher than that, I don't think there's much room, from my point of view, about doing sort of easier subjects. I guess that's sort of how I would answer that question. Yeah,
that's good, thank you. Yeah. Having said that, my biggest suggestion is that, let's say if a student is set on doing engineering, but don't settle on getting 82 percentile, right? Aim for a higher. I'm not trying to say that always kind of be, not being satisfied, but try to aim for a better ATAR so that you're doing well with your subjects, and as a result, you're keeping your options open, right? So and you might change your mindset towards the end of year 12. So that way you might have a better opportunity or a different opportunity if you got a better ATAR. So, and plus, there's this common saying, like if you, one of my friends actually told me when I was in high school, like he was doing really well at that time. Okay, let's aim for the moon, at least we'll end up on top of a tree, right? So aim high, that's a big thing I would say. Aim high and believe in yourself and putting that effort so that you can get a better ATAR. And to keep your options open. Let's struggle later. So why it might be beneficial doing a wet course, again, from boosting the ATAR point of view. Now, so vocational education and training, so most students can do that when they're in year 10 and of course year 11 as well. My suggestion is if possible, do it when they're in year 10, so that way you're not loading more work in stage 1, I mean year 11 and year 12 point of view. Now, what is the benefit of doing a wet course? It comes down to helping to boost the ATAR. So I haven't got the slide on that one, but basically if a student has done a wet course, qualifying wet course, then what happens is towards the ATAR calculation, they will consider the top 3 subjects, as in the subjects that the student has scored well, and get the average of that as the 4th one. So if that average has to be better than the 4th subject anyway, right? So therefore that the score, the credit they got from the 4th subject will get replaced with this. So as a result, there's a chance to improve the ATAR, right? So that's the biggest benefit. It is becoming popular, and some questions, again, not a recommendation, but I'm answering based on common questions parents ask or students ask. Now, provision of the courses wise, there are different providers as well. Generally, they have to go through the school. But within that as well, there's some flexibility. Other providers, third-party providers, where some students, they do those courses during the holidays or the summer holidays, so that it's not interfering with the course school term. The next point we want to discuss is the subject acceleration, especially with SACE. There are two elements we were talking here, in that depending on the school as well, one benefit that SACE students can have is accelerate certain subjects so that they can finish some of their year 12 subjects when they're year 11, right? So commonly maths is an option, chemistry, biology is an option. So here we captured some examples, right? So completing stage 1 when they're in year 10, and as a result completing stage 2 of that particular subject when they're in year 11. So that one subject out of the way in the best case scenario if they have done well. Even otherwise, I think I've had many students, let's say they had this opportunity, they do some subjects when they're in year 11, like stage 2, instead of an A or A plus, let's say that's what they're aiming for, they end up getting a B plus. But then they repeated that subject second time around, so that they know what they have done well and where they have gone wrong, so they've been able to do well with less effort. So that's a benefit as well. Then the second element we are talking here is the subject acceleration from the university topics in year 12 point of view, right? So for those students who have completed some subjects prior to year 12, then there's this university acceleration pathway. The names have changed recently with Uni Adelaide. It used to be the Head Start program, but now they refer to that as the Activate program. And then Flinders University, they have the Extension Studies program. So this is where if a student has completed a year 12 subject when they're in year 11, then they can do a first year uni subject when they're in year 12. Again, there's a big benefit here. If those students do well in that first year uni subject, students who are at a certain level and above, what they find is that it is easier to get a high distinction, which is 85%, than getting an A plus or a merit in a year 12 subject. What is the benefit? If you get a high distinction, then that 20 credits will count towards the ATAR. From a year 12 subject point of view, you can never get a 20 credits towards the ATAR, right? So maximum would be 19.8 or so, right?
Well, I had 19.9, so I'll say 19.9 is probably the max.
So depending on the subject and the merit level, right? So yes, we are talking about points, but it will matter towards that the upper end ATAR wise. So that's why I think we recommend, okay, check with the school if they have those opportunities. Always try to make use of them. So All right, so
Sorry,
I'll
I'm
continue with
gonna
the
try and
rest.
squeeze
So
through
here we captured 3 scenarios, right? So the standard situation, as you said, from again SACE point of view, you need 4.5 subjects, so 4 subjects, and then the AIF if it's the core one. Otherwise, the best half of the 5th subject. Scenario 2. 3.5 subjects plus the wet course. As you said, if a student has done the wet course, then that the best 3 subjects get the average of those 3 will be counted towards the 4th subject. So that will be better than the 4th subject. Now, a third case is the accelerated situation, where if students have gone through the subject acceleration, and if they have done the Head Start course, I think universities allow up to 2 courses, then that credit will count towards boosting the ATAR. Now, based on the current situation, you can't do both. Say if you do, I mean, you can do it, but they won't count both, right? So let's say a student has done a wet course as well as subjects acceleration. So you won't get that dual benefit, so either or, right? So that's something to keep in mind.
Just with
Yeah.
the wet course, does the choice of the wet course affects the ATAR, or just any wet course?
Any wet course, I mean, that is recognized is fine. So yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. So how to succeed in SACE and IB? This is more towards mindset wise, right? So I strongly believe, especially with the Australian curriculum, where there's a SACE or IB, which is well structured. If students put their effort early and manage their work, they can do really well. But this is because some other countries the situation can be different, whereas here the structure is pretty good, and then the key is maintaining that focus and be clear as to what you want to do, and then work to a schedule, be consistent, and then don't let yourself down even if there are hiccups, right? Especially with the stage 2, where there are quite a few summatives for each subject, right? So SAT tests, and then things can go up and down. Maybe the first one coming out from the school holidays, maybe they're not in the rhythm, so they might not get the best for the first test. But don't let yourselves down, and then continue, keep at it, because the one benefit with SACE point of view, 70% of the assessment, this is from the final ATAR wise, right, coming through the ongoing assessments. So only 30% come from the final exam. So therefore you have the opportunity to catch up, right? On the other hand, IB, about 70 to 80% is from the final exam. So there are some students who do really well in one big exam, right? For those students, they might find IB as a better opportunity, right? So that's something, going back to the early part of the presentation, that the parents and students need to think, okay, what are my strengths? Where do I thrive? And accordingly select the subjects or the pathway. Study tips wise, whether we are in year 11 or year 10, use active learning techniques. I know with the devices, maybe the current year 10s may not be affected that much compared to year 5s and year 6 students currently, but still maintain that focus, and then use effective techniques so that you can understand the concept and memorize, right? So I'm not a fan of just jumping into memorization, especially for maths and physics, those kind of subjects. Yes, biology, yes, you have to, right? So, but with the understanding, if you then improve that memorization with the understanding in place, then it's very easy to excel and recall when required, right? And exam prep. So, again, there are a lot of students who are doing really well and they're very good with their knowledge, but then bringing that back under exam conditions has been a challenge, right? So, again, there are a lot of parameters that define that. So, once again, put a big emphasis on practicing for exams. Again, this is not about memorizing and just spitting the answer, right? But it's about mimicking the exam behavior so that you know, okay, where you're lacking the knowledge, or where you find it challenging to recall what you've learned, or time management, right? Or selecting the questions so that you make some momentum based on by picking some easier questions early. So that comes through practice, right? So therefore, that's a big emphasis that I'm putting in as well for you guys, for the students to improve the chances of getting a better ATAR. So we put this as a summary as well. Again, starting early is a big thing, right? So whether it's doing weekly homework or you're doing a folio task or an assignment, don't wait till the last minute, especially in school assignments wise, the assignments that matter. Teachers are there to give you feedback as well, so that start early. Like I know procrastination is a big problem for most of us, right? But chunk it in, break into small pieces and get started. So that way you gain that confidence step by step, so that you're making progress towards the proper outcome, right? Because it is known that sometimes if you try to perfect things, and that causes the procrastination, because you think, okay, I'm getting judged and I want to get a better result. I need a big time frame to get that better result, right? So that keep pushing things. So that's the mindset that you have to change and get started, right? So that comes with practice. But year 10s, if we've got majority students point of year 10s, then it's a good time to actually practice and work on that. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the routine, the schedule is super important, and so that you guys, students' point of view, you can fit in your other aspects, sports or music, the other activities as well, and you can have a balanced lifestyle and put that focus towards the academic side as well. Act on feedback. Improve, that's one big way we can improve on, right? So you get your feedback from your teachers or coaches, and whichever it is, right? And then implement that. We talked about, practice exams under exam conditions. Stay consistent, connected with the schedule, right? So don't let yourself down because of you had a bad exam or something else didn't go well. Just keep at it, keep pushing. Ask for help early. Once again, connecting with the feedback aspect, right? So if you think you could have done better, or you're unsure what to do, once again, reach out to your teachers, or if you're getting additional support, your tutors, that's going to be a big help to get that confidence as well. Connecting with everything, right? So once again, one thing I always mention to parents in the Australian education system, students can do a balance of effort, right? It doesn't have to be just academic, right? You can do your sport or do your music and instruments, and then get that balance. So that is a positive break. So that way, it's not a case of you're going on devices and then harming yourself, but doing something else which will help you to build the personality as well. So take the benefit out of that. So we're coming to the last part, I think. So looking at how we can help. Tutors SA, as we mentioned, we provide all the support for the core subjects. For year 10 students, we have maths, English and general science, and also all the SACE subjects, right? So we are here to help. If you're interested, feel free to contact us, or team will provide you more information. And then MedPrep wise, we have from the UCAT preparation wise, we have two main courses, right? So one is the UCAT main course for those students who will be doing the UCAT exam within the next 12 months, right? So our current students is just finishing the course because the exam is happening in July and August. So if you're talking about the year 10 students, that is the UCAT Head Start course. So connecting with your question before as well, early start is important, but not too early, right? So getting exposure to more questions as possible, more techniques as possible, so that they understand how things different, because at the end of the day, there are 200 plus questions that you have to do within 2 hours, right? So that time management and the perseverance is very important. So that's why I think we designed this course to the UCAT Head Start course for students to start a bit early. Additional thing, I think I do this case by case scenario, as in if parents ask, reach out to, but we have and I provide the subject selection advice depending on the situation, right? So more than happy to help you, and if you're interested in getting another session like one-on-one, you can send us an email, so we can arrange a time and we can go through the scenarios, right? In addition to that, I think the other opportunities to get exposure to UCAT or the support for the regular tuition wise. So I think that's basically the end of what I wanted to share. I really appreciate you being here, and then I hope it was useful. But if you got any questions, please feel free to ask, or I'll hang around as well.